When you're a young monk at Wat Pa Nanachat, the international forest monastery, you read these biographies of these great masters like Luang Por Man, Luang Por Tet, Ajahn Lee, and you start reading about how they get amazing jhanas and they start to get stream entry experiences and how they're practicing very hard to finish off the last of the kilesas to get the final fruit of arahantship. So it's very inspiring, very wonderful that we have such books as a reference and that we know that there really have been in recent history monks who have practiced well and nuns who have practiced well and who have got great results. So of course you come to it as a young monk and you want to be like that too. You want to start to experience jhanas and jnanas and sotapanna and nibbana, everything. And so when you get an opportunity for retreat, the community of Wat Nanachat will go off into a jungle area in Ampa Sayok in Kanchanaburi on the border of Burma for 2 or 3 months every year. And so I would go and have this experience of practicing very hard, putting a lot of effort into sitting and walking and chanting, sometimes getting quite peaceful mind states, but then other times getting quite grumpy and irritated and frustrated because I would practice very hard, try very hard, and experience some peacefulness. But then the next day, grumpy mood, irritation. Well, I'm sure all of you have studied the 5 hindrances. All of us interested in meditation have to become familiar with the 5 hindrances. So we have the craving for, the sensual craving as the first hindrance, and then you have the irritation and aversion as the second hindrance. So, and in my experience, when you try very hard, you can also look at the causes of suffering when you're looking at the 4 Noble Truths, right? So we have a craving on a foundation of ignorance. That's actually the cause of suffering. And yet there is an end of suffering, there is nibbana, there is a state that one can experience, a higher reality that one can experience where there's no suffering. And so in the beginning, I think it's inevitable we develop some faith, and we want that. We understand, we see suffering, we recognize there's suffering, we want to put an end to suffering, we want to be just like the Buddha and the Arahants. And so what happens is we bring a lot of desire to that. It's a kind of craving. When you're looking at the 4 Noble Truths, the cause of suffering, kama tanha, bhava tanha, vibhava tanha. So sensual craving, craving for being and craving for becoming. So inevitably, we start with the ignorance of a self-view that has suffering, that wants to be free from suffering. And inevitably in the beginning it's like, okay, I will practice hard and I will become a stream enterer, I will get jhana. And of course, there's a lot of ignorance and delusion and craving in the beginning. And so what happened is you practice very hard, put a lot of energy in, a lot of willfulness, with a lot of desire, and I was able to experience some peaceful mind states. But then, of course, the grumpy mind states, the irritated mind states, the impatience also came. One of the times when I went into the jungle, Ampa Sayok, Samnak Song Dao Dam, some people may know Ajahn Siri Panyo is the abbot there, my big brother, ordained 1 year before I did. So I've been a novice for 1.5 years at Wat Pa Nanachat and become a bhikkhu, and I went into the jungle area and was practicing very hard. And just as I was saying, sometimes the mind's very spacious, very peaceful. Other times very, very heavy mind states. And so it was my good fortune that Tanajananan came into that jungle area during that time on Tudong with some 5 monks. And I had the opportunity to ask him some questions. I said, Tanachan, Another of the hindrances, of course, is doubt. We'll talk about all 5 of the hindrances so far: sensual craving, irritation and aversion, and the 5th one is doubt. So at that time, I did not have doubt in the Buddha or his teachings. I did not have doubt in the existence of arahants, well-practiced monks and nuns. What I had doubt in, though, was my ability to patiently endure, or whether or not I had enough merit, enough parami, accumulated virtue to make it. So because I was confused, I'm keeping very good sila, I'm putting forth a good effort, I have very strong faith, but I get these very heavy moods. I doubt maybe I don't have enough merit, maybe I don't have enough parami, maybe I should disrobe. That's my doubt. But fortunately, I was able to discuss with Tanajananand, and he said, actually, the situation, when we begin to keep very good ethical standards, we keep our sila, for the monks you keep your vinaya, practice more sense restraint, indriya samvara, meditate regularly, the mind will get more sensitive, and that's supposed to happen. When the mind gets more sensitive, it's going to notice dukkha. It's going to notice the characteristic of dukkha, dukkha laksana. And so this is an important part of the process, but it is painful. And so I was asking Tanajan Kap, I have this experience that I feel very heavy negativity and despair, and I have doubt that I can patiently endure. I have doubt maybe I'm doing something wrong. And Tanajan, I was very lucky that I met him because he gave very good advice. From the wisdom of his own experience, he said, actually, he felt similarly at times as a junior monk when he was training with Luang Por Chah in Ubon. He said, what happens for meditators in the beginning is that sensitivity can develop before equanimity. He said, but actually the perception of seeing so much dukkha is correct. Dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, suffering, is the characteristic of conditions. So when we come to meditate and we see body is full of suffering, emotions, sometimes pleasant, often painful, irritating thoughts that we'd rather not have, but we still have, there's a lot of dukkha in the mind-body experience, especially when the mind becomes more sensitive and we start to pay attention to it. Most people in the world are trying to distract themselves and to ignore it. Meditators come and sit on the cushion, try to be with their breath, and they notice pain in the body, pain in the mind. And so Tanajanand said, it's as though you're in a house which is on fire. And you're on fire too. You're in that house and you're burning with it. And he said, actually, that's the truth. That's the case. But you don't yet have a place to rest. So Tanajan was talking about mindfulness and clear comprehension, the ability to separate out the knowing with clear awareness from that which is known, the experience of dukkha. He said, actually, this is an inevitable stage and something that you have to practice with, and all you can do is patiently endure. But you should have faith. This is normal. This is part of the process. And it is through patiently enduring that the mindfulness gets stronger over a period of time and is able to then separate from that which is known. But Tanajan recommended one other thing. He recommended to me, he said, you do have enough merit, you are practicing correctly, nothing's going wrong. There is often the experience of suffering that we have to develop patience with. When we look at the Awada Patimokkha, teaching of Lord Buddha in the Jetavana, one of the things he said when laying down the principle of Vinaya, as you know, Lord Buddha teaches Dharma and Vinaya, Dharma and discipline. Lord Buddha said, patient endurance is the supreme incinerator of kilesa. So we do have the root kilesa of greed. We do have the root kilesa of hatred. We have delusion. And we have to patiently endure as we learn about these things and study about these things. So Tanajan said he wanted me to develop metta, Brahma Vihara. He said, Tanachalo, for the first 10 minutes of every sitting meditation, I recommend that you spread loving kindness to yourself. And this is a step that many people overlook, and it's actually very important that we don't overlook this, because as I've been talking about, there is suffering and pain in the spiritual path, where one will come across challenges and difficulties when painful karmas ripen, or just with learning about, in the process of purifying the mind, working with painful mind states, painful doubts, the 5 hindrances, the kilesas, etc. So it's kind of we want to realize not self. We don't want to be a selfish self. We want to realize nibbana and not self, emptiness of self. So the idea that you would spend quite a bit of time spreading loving kindness, developing loving kindness for oneself seems a bit strange. But we have to understand it in terms of sustainability of our practice and in terms of laying the appropriate foundation. So Lord Buddha explains in the Sutra on the 11 benefits of loving kindness. Most people want to experience peacefulness, right? We put a lot of effort into meditating and we want peaceful states. So Lord Buddha explains that in those who cultivate loving kindness, the mind becomes peaceful easily. So Tanajan explained to me that if I would spend the first 10 minutes spreading loving kindness to myself, so that means radiating it inwardly, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be well, may I be happy, and just bringing a pleasant mind state. These Brahma Vihara can be described as a divine abiding, a pleasant abiding, a pleasant mind state that we can cultivate and abide in and trust. Lord Buddha says it's wholesome. So when we establish that, then we now have something that we can do when things are difficult. You can have loving kindness for yourself. When we do the chanting, may I be free from suffering, may all beings be well, may all beings be happy, may I be well, may I be happy. We have to acknowledge that we are one being, conventionally speaking, in samsara, not yet liberated, who still has suffering. And so we have to have loving kindness for this being. With that as the foundation, then you spread loving kindness to teachers, relatives, friends. Then you train in including neutral beings. Then you train in including difficult beings, enemies. Finally, all beings. But the first step is important, because when you come to the meditation cushion, whatever 5 hindrances are present, they all have some pain associated with them. Sensual craving is painful. Irritation and aversion is painful. Restlessness and worry is painful. Sloth and torpor is painful. Doubts are painful. And so when we cultivate some samatha practices, a pleasant mind state that we can place in the mind, generate, give rise to, then it makes our bhavana more pleasant. And if you want to sit a lot, if you want to cultivate a lot, it's helpful if you can enjoy it. It's more likely that you will meditate more if you learn how to enjoy it. So Tanajan's advice is very helpful. As a one pansa monk, Tanajan told me, spread loving kindness to yourself for the first 5 to 10 minutes, then to your teachers, then to some friends, and then do your breath meditation. And it might not seem like much, 10 minutes, but 10 minutes 4 or 5 times a day, 4 or 5 months, 4 or 5 years, 25 years, then this practice gains a momentum and it becomes something that one can rely upon or pick up. It's a bit like a walking stick when you're walking on a trail. This is a wholesome thing that you can depend upon, something that you can hold, which is skillful. So later, many years passed, and I still wasn't an arahant, and still wanted to have amazing insights and amazing samadhi. And I started to go and practice in Bodh Gaya. And many of you have probably been, and many of you will know that Bodh Gaya is a noisy place. And it can be cold in the morning and hot in the day, insects, bugs, sometimes bad smells, a lot of smoke, incense and things, and loud groups. I noticed when I was meditating in Bodh Gaya, because of the blessings of the Buddha that are there, possibly because of the energy of the faith of the devotees, that when the mind became peaceful, it became more peaceful than normal. But similarly, there would also be irritation and some grumpiness. And just sitting in an open public place for many hours, there's a lot of impingement. And so I found it difficult to do more than 6 hours a day of meditation in Bodh Gaya. But I wanted to do more. I felt that having received the plane ticket from my students and the accommodation costs and the food, that it would be appropriate to practice as hard as possible. And so I also learnt how to use the mudita citta. So suppose you're trying to meditate under the Bodhi tree, the mind's becoming a little bit peaceful, but a group comes down the stairs and around the Bodhi tree with a loudspeaker, and they do their chanting, sometimes Cambodian, sometimes Vietnamese, sometimes Sri Lankan, sometimes Thai, and sometimes several groups at the same time. And the speaker's very loud, and the mind comes out of its peaceful state, and there might be some feeling of irritation. Why do they open their speaker so loud? Why can't they be considerate to the other practitioners, etc., etc.? On one level, it's a fair enough thought, but if you think it, it doesn't give any happiness. And so I trained myself, well, what if I were to focus upon the intention of these people and to rejoice? So that when whatever group came, I would train myself internally, sadhu, 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 and train myself to say, I rejoice in your faith. I rejoice that you have made the effort to come all the way to India. I rejoice in the merits that you're making. May you grow in Buddha Dhamma. And so I train myself. You hear the speaker coming, and already I rejoice. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And it became possible that to avoid the mind states of irritation and grumpiness and resentment, various kilesa, hindrances and kilesas. So then I found it was possible to increase from 6 hours to 7 or 8 hours a day, because these Brahma Viharas, they give the mind a wholesome mind object that produces merit and supports well-being in place of irritation, or in place of painful doubts and impatience. So as we were talking about, Lord Buddha said, patient endurance is the supreme incinerator of defilements. So this is, all practitioners need to learn a lot about patient endurance. It's something that we have to do, because this is what grinds down the old habits while we establish new habits. So sometimes practice goes well, sometimes the mind's peaceful, oftentimes there's a lot of thinking, hindrances, sleepiness, restlessness, and then we have to depend upon patient endurance. But the metta practice, when things are tough, being able to radiate loving kindness and hold the energy of loving kindness in your chest and in your upper body, it's pleasant, brightening, produces merit. The merit also supports your further growth. And the mudita practice, as I was explaining, in a situation where you could be fault-finding, but you train yourself instead to focus on what is good and to rejoice, training yourself to have wholesome responses, pleasant responses, skillful responses to support the process. So eventually, I was able to increase my efforts in Bodh Gaya. I would go back year after year because I have a lot of faith in Lord Buddha, and I enjoy devotional practice, expressing my faith. And as I said, I noticed that when the mind became peaceful in Bodhgaya, it became more peaceful. So I was very interested to deepen that, explore that, experiment with that. But I said to myself, because you've been to Bodhgaya a good number of times, and many people can only go one time in a lifetime, some people can't go at all. If I'm going to go every year, then I should increase my efforts. So I did. I increased my effort from 6 hours a day to 7 hours a day to 8 hours a day to 9 hours a day. And eventually I increased my efforts in Bodhgaya to 10 hours a day of sitting. And I would do it for 6 weeks. I try to do 400 hours of meditation in a 6-week period. There might be some bad weather, there might be a couple of sick days, but in general, I would try to do 10 hours a day. So that would be 4 sessions of 2.5 hours. It was very difficult to get from the 8.5 hours to the 10 hours a day. That was difficult. And again, I found that the metta practice and compassion. So suppose you're sitting for 2 hours and there's a lot of pain in the body and you just don't want to do it anymore, but you have to sit for another half an hour. And then there's also noise, some obnoxious, irritating noise, as well as your physical and mental pain. So this is when you can do compassion practice. During that experience, you're a being that has some suffering. May I be free from suffering. May I be free from suffering. An important thing with regard to Brahma Vihara practice is that we have to be sincere. So when you make the wish, may I be well, you have to really mean it in your heart of hearts, sincerely generate that. Similarly with compassion, may I be free from suffering, you really mean it. So when there's suffering in the mind, resentment to pain, resentment to impingement, just not wanting to do it anymore, it's a hot experience. And when you give rise to the thought, may I be free from suffering, may I be free from suffering, it's a cool response. And so you're bringing some coolness into this hot experience. And the experience I had many, many times was that these Brahma Vihara practices, metta, karuna, mudita, would help the mind get past its painful mind state. Because as we know, you're all students of Vipassana, all mind states arise, stay for some time and cease. And this is why many people will be wondering, why meditate 10 hours a day? Why meditate for 2.5 hours in one session? And the point is this: applying these skillful means, these kusala ubaya, the painful mind state would cease. And when the painful mind state ceases, because remember, you're keeping making the effort, be mindful of the in-breath, be mindful of the out-breath, be mindful of the in-breath, be mindful of the out-breath. You're making effort to generate mindfulness, clarify mindfulness, hold the mindfulness in the present moment in the body. Consistently, painful mind states arise. Apply a skillful remedy, replacement through opposites, bring the mind to balance, keep the mind in the middle. Lumpur Cha says, Tanajanandan said, keep the mind in the middle, not falling into delighting or aversion. Then when the painful mind state ceases, but the momentum of the mindfulness is good, then you can experience some samadhi, samma sati, giving rise to samma samadhi, and experience very peaceful mind states. And at the end of the 2.5 hour session, feeling light in body, light in mind, bright, radiant, happy, tranquil, serene, walking off to go and take the meal or to go to the bathroom, feeling like floating. In Thai they say gai bao, jai bao, light in body and mind. And so in my experience, using these Brahma Viharas as a skillful way to pacify hindrances, bring the mind to a state of balance while increasing efforts in developing the samadhi, then it's very, very helpful. And of course, if you sit longer, I mean, we all chant it, Rupang anicchang, Vedana anicca, Sanya anicca, Sankhara anicca, Vinyana anicchang. Body is impermanent, forms are impermanent, feelings are impermanent, etc. But we have our Suttamaya Panya, the wisdom that comes from studying. You have your Bhavanamaya Panya, the wisdom that comes from wise reflection, considering deeply. And then you have your Chittamaya Panya, when the mind on a deeper level really sees it. So the benefit of sitting longer, the benefits of these meditation retreats and of sitting longer for longer periods is you really get to see painful feelings in the shoulder, can't take it, can't stand it, but after 20 minutes it's gone. And if the mindfulness is good, you really notice the changing and the changing and the changing and the cessation. There can be an experience of letting go, of a feeling of self-suffering, and having experience of a boundless, spacious peace. Similarly with the hindrances, irritation, aversion, resistance, resentment. May I be well, may I be happy, may I be well, may I be happy, and then it's gone. No aversion, no irritation, no resistance, just contentment, peacefulness, stillness. And so the benefits of increasing one's efforts and of learning to apply the Brahma Viharas to bring the mind to balance, to pacify the hindrances, are that you're much more likely to experience some Samma Samadhi and much more likely to experience some Vipassana Jnana, where the mind sees impermanence and not self more deeply, in a profound way, in a way that weakens and begins to uproot delusion. With regards equanimity Brahma Vihara, for anybody who wants to develop equanimity, upekkha, I think meditation is the best way, because when you come to sit, the first two hindrances, liking and not liking, sometimes you don't want to sit, but you sit. Ajahn Chah said, the correct way to practice is you practice when you want to, you practice when you don't want to, you practice when you're diligent, you practice when you're lazy, you practice when it's peaceful, and you practice when it's not peaceful. In doing this, you learn about mind states, you learn about moods. Suppose you come to sit and you don't want to sit. Well, after 15 minutes, the mind is peaceful. You'll learn not to trust these moods. You'll learn the benefits of sitting consistently. And so when we come to sit, we have to patiently endure with painful mind states. And when we begin to experience Kanika Samadhi, some samadhi for 5 minutes, there is some equanimity in that, some aloofness from hindrances to some degree for some moments, some balance, some equipoise. And then you sit longer and train to sit for longer periods, and you get these upachara samadhi, 15 or 20 minutes of coolness. And you can experience what is the mind like when it's not swayed by liking or disliking. What's the mind like when it's still, content, peaceful? Because people misunderstand equanimity. People can think that equanimity is indifference. And this, of course, is the near enemy. Equanimity is not indifference. Equanimity is balance, serenity, equipoise. And the more samadhi you experience, the more you have this experience of perceiving mind states arising and ceasing. In the course of practicing many hours of sitting or many hours of walking, you will have the experience of mind states arising and ceasing, arising and ceasing. When you develop this anicca sanya, this awareness that it will cease, it will arise, it will cease, then you don't get deluded by it as much. One can apply a certain amount of mindfulness and clear comprehension, knowing that all mind states will arise and cease. You've seen it hundreds of times, thousands of times, develop some insight into it. So this ability, this capacity to keep the mind in a balanced state, to keep the mind in the middle, to not be deluded by mind states, gets better and better. And so through the process of meditation, when you see these mind states arise and cease, and then you abide in a period of stillness after the mind state ceases, this is the way we learn about what equanimity is. Not liking and not liking, not being swayed to the left or the right, just staying still. And the more samadhi a person can develop, a practitioner can develop, that of course plays an enormously important role later on, because I believe the equanimity in its pure state is the fourth jhana. And from what my teachers have told me, after practitioners become stream enterers, they have to abide in the fourth jhana quite often, because that's what starves what's remaining of liking and not liking. Stay in this state of pure equanimity. And as the kilesa gets thinner and thinner and weaker, the deeper insights, Sakdagami, once returner, Anagami, non-returner, the deeper insights into not self become possible, because the clouding, deluding nature of the kilesa gets weaker and weaker through not feeding liking and not liking, through just staying in the middle, staying still. Yeah. But equanimity Brahma Vihara is not easy to develop. One develops equanimity through patiently enduring. And so when I recollect Tanajananan's advice to me as a one-panta bhikkhu 24 years ago, it was enormously helpful. He explained to me that nothing was going wrong. There is dukkha in spiritual practice as well. One has to patiently endure with that. Lord Buddha says in the Awada Patimokkha that is what's going to burn up the kilesa from your mind. The problem is, we feel like we're burning in that experience. We also feel like we're burning. And so one has to have faith. Okay, Lord Buddha explained that this patiently enduring plays an important function. It's actually weakening the defilements. Tanajanana explained, through patiently enduring with them and keeping on intending to be mindful of one in-breath, the mindfulness gets stronger and stronger in the capacity to separate the knowing from the known. And then the ability to develop insight, seeing it clearly. What does mindfulness do? Good mindfulness sees things according to their true nature, arising and ceasing, unsatisfactory, not self. So I'm very grateful to Lord Buddha, I'm very grateful to Tanajanana, and I can see 25 years later that applying the Brahma Viharas, cultivating the Brahma Viharas and practicing regularly, that there is less suffering. You can see basically that it works. I can see, compared to the amount of suffering I had 25 years ago, the amount of suffering that I have now, I can see that Lord Buddha's teachings on cultivating the four Brahma Viharas as a support to cultivating mindfulness, clear comprehension, and wisdom is effective. So I encourage you all. I rejoice in your practice, and I encourage you all. I hope that something that I've said has been helpful.